Hello and welcome to the Beyond Limits podcast. I'm Jermaine Benjamin, one of the directors at Transition Partners, and this podcast is where we invite leaders from the talent, HR and culture sphere to discuss everything to do with attracting, retaining and developing people. Welcome to Beyond Limits podcast. Really pleased today to be joined by Jack from 10x Banking. It's been a couple of weeks in the making. We've had to reschedule, so I'm glad to finally get you, mate. And I know you're going on holiday as well soon, so thanks for squeezing us in. We had a really interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago. So I was really keen to get you on and share your experience and some of the really interesting bits that you've done and are doing at the minute. So first of all, I think it'd be fitting, as I normally do, allow you just to give a bit of an introduction to yourself, what you're doing, and really just if you'd give us a bit of an introduction around your journey into kind of talent acquisition management. That would be amazing, Jack.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for having me. Like you said, it's great to get a chance to have a chat. So my journey, I mean, it's a relatively normal one, to be honest, to start with. That kind of classic adage of falling into recruitment, perhaps. But I went through kind of the agency side of things, worked for a company where I ended up focusing on technology and focused on a few areas. So in terms of tech stacks, had a wide kind of variety of clients as well, which was great. And from there, I managed to, again, pure chance, managed to kind of get an interview and speak with the people at 10x. And at that stage, I knew a bit about them. They were a client, actually, of the agency I was working for, but I hadn't worked directly with them. So I knew a bit and was really interested in the fintech side, the growth, the technology. So went through the process and started there just over 3 years ago, actually. So it was 2 weeks before the pandemic. So I did maybe I saw 10x before the pandemic, and with desks full of developers coding and a big office that was jam packed. And then within 2 weeks we were locked down. So we had a big shift. I'd never worked a day from home in my life. So there was a big personal shift, and also how we worked. But from there, since I've been at 10x, I've always had a focus on product and engineering. And I have gone from being an internal recruiter, I guess, and a talent partner, and moved through over the last 3 years into talent acquisition manager. So I, along with the team, focus on certain areas of P&E. So at the moment that is Supercore, which is our product, platform, CISO, and also recently I've picked up a few other roles in our central function, which is really interesting actually to get a snippet or a look into what makes the coup function and the central function tick. So yeah, 3 years, and I'm not just saying this because my boss might listen, but I've loved every minute of it. It's been an interesting 3 years with external factors that we've all seen and we've all experienced. COVID, then obviously over the last 12 months, a bit more perhaps around external economic factors. So it's been a really, really interesting ride with 10x, and I think it's a great place to work and it's a great place to recruit for.
And just interested, just to pull something out of what you mentioned there, just interested in your opinion, because we have a people and performance manager, and we've been speaking about this quite a lot over last year, is the difference between kind of being a talent acquisition specialist and really moving towards, you mentioned the word partner, and kind of the difference between being a partner in an organisation as opposed to, traditional talent acquisition specialist or HR, consultant. Kind of interested in what your perspective is on that, really, that partnering element.
Yeah, definitely. I think you have to have, and I can only talk from my experience, but I think that you have to have that partnering element. One of the things I saw the difference from agency to internal was stuff we all know about, right? You don't have multiple clients. Perhaps you might have a good candidate in agency that you then have a number of clients you can get them across to. We still have elements of that where in 10x you might have multiple teams hiring, and you need to know what makes those teams tick. But in order to do that, you need to partner up with the hiring managers, with the senior stakeholders, it might be your VP of engineering. You need to be able to build rapport and trust with those areas and those people. And that's true of any part of life, right? You need to be able to partner up and you need to be able to build relationships that have longevity. So I think people in our team, in our function, like I said, that's all I can speak for. I think the partnering aspect is really good and actually puts us in a really good place for helping be strategic rather than just responsive to needs. So we can get ahead of things. We can work with more roadmaps, pipelines, and give us a bit more gravitas ultimately, and show that we are a part of the solution to their problem, and it's not just kind of thrown over the fence. We need an engineer. Can you find it? We need it right now. It can be a lot more proactive, like I said, rather than responsive.
And just going back to what you were mentioning initially about you mentioned about 10x and the growth, and I know there's been some significant growth recently. How have you prepared for that, really? If that's even possible, but how have you tried to prepare for that growth in advance? And like what you just mentioned then about partnering and trying to be proactive and getting ahead of the curve, if, for lack of a better kind of word. How have you managed that?
I think it's actually a really interesting way of looking at it, and I think it's the right way, because what we all see is the headlines, right? And the easy headline is X company have hired 20% more people, or are going to hire 20% more, and that's no mean feat. That volume and being able to hire at volume is a skill and something that is really tough. But actually, how do you prepare your employees? And I think there's multiple facets of that. One is, I always kind of, I can't remember who told me, but it's one of those things that sticks in my mind around hiring is a trust exercise, and it's the most simplest form. And I don't mean to oversimplify it, because like I said, it's really tough to hire at scale, and small scale, to be honest. If you've got a high quality kind of level, it's really tough. But what I mean by trust exercise is ultimately a candidate is trusting us that the stuff that we're getting across, the technical challenge, we are what we say we are. Think about what's going on in the world right now. We're financially stable. We have a plan, and we can support that person coming in. That's one aspect. The other side, from our point of view, is around the candidate specifically. We trust that they have done what they say they have, ultimately. But we also have to trust our process. And so, in terms of preparing our employees on that side, we have to have something in place that they have full confidence in, whether that's the interviewers in the interview squad, the hiring manager, the senior stakeholders that we deal with. And we have to have the trust and confidence in the process and prepare them accordingly for that. So that's one element, and we have recently implemented, and we're currently rolling it out across the whole business, the objective assessment piece that we've worked on. So we can build that confidence. But it actually, in terms of preparing employees, an interesting take on that as well is when you see such high volume, it has a knock-on effect on the current employees. So if you look at from a people team point of view, a HR team working and partnering with the engineering function or the product function or compliance, whatever it might be, you have to be able to be strategic around that and partner properly. So when you bring someone new into a team, never mind if you bring 5 people into a team, that has an effect on the current team who have deliverables, they have really important client commitments, and they ultimately just have a day-to-day job. And when you bring someone new in, the team have to be accessible, they have to be approachable, they're going to have to help get that person or those people started. So there's also an element of you need to be able to control the flow at which that comes. So, I think we work very closely with senior stakeholders in whatever area it might be on the actual flow of people coming in and onboarding, because our client commitments aren't going to go anywhere and they're super important. but also bringing these people in and giving them what they deserve as a new employee is also important. So there's multiple ways you can prepare.
And just on a side note on that, how have you found, or what have you seen in terms of the kind of cultural and element of integrating quite a lot of new people into existing teams that are obviously doing a good job because you guys are growing, and how have you found that?
Yeah, it's not easy, and I don't think there's any sort of one size fits all in how you do that. I think what we do have at 10x, and over the 3 years I've been here, I always say that it's almost like working for 2 different companies. When I joined, it was that very much startup. We had lots of work that was going on in build phase, and even as a company, we were startup in terms of being sophisticated with things like benefits packages, progression, all that kind of stuff. So the focus was on build, and we built this excellent product. Then we moved into launching with live clients. We then got we had our product out there. It was doing really well. It's still doing really well. And so then we were very much in that scale up phase. So it's a case of how you deal with it. I think it depends on where you're at and your maturity as a company. Unfortunately, it'd be great if there was an answer that everyone could do. I think in terms of keeping your culture, it comes from the top down. That's no surprise. That's not groundbreaking. I think we're very lucky with our leadership. That does filter down very well. The people team have a massive impact on that, and how we manage how we cultivate but also grow our culture. So I think there's always stuff you can do, and it takes an honest and transparent view to be able to evolve with things that are going on, whether that's pure growth, like you said, whether it's changes in ways of working that we've seen, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's the ability to be dynamic, be happy to evolve, not be stubborn in the ways, and always looking to be better, I think is ultimately how you're going to keep a culture or grow a culture.
And you touched upon the objective assessment, which we spoke about as well, so I was really keen to ask you about that, and really dig into that and share that for anybody else listening. So could you tell us a bit more about the work you're doing around this objective assessment? Or what it is really
Yeah, definitely. So to give you some context and some insight into what it means for us specifically, which is the underlying foundation of what the objective assessment is. It's specific to us. It's a bespoke hiring method that helps us find the best talent for roles at 10x. So it's not an off-the-shelf product. It's something that we've spent a long time as a talent team working on with hiring managers, with senior stakeholders in various areas of the business to make sure it's 10x. I think you can probably relatively easily go out and buy assessment frameworks or packages. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to build something that is going to be help us be the best. So it's inclusive by design. So by objectively assessing candidates, we're able to remove as much bias as possible from the hiring process. And I think words like standardized and structure can be maybe scary on face value. Some people don't want that. They want it to be, and we want it to be authentic. We want people to get a feel for the people they're going to be working with. We don't want it to be robotic. We don't want people to be reading questions off a sheet, one by one. But what we do want is a consistency in approach. So what we can do is we can give our teams that by rolling the objective assessment out, and we can also provide tools and strategies and training to make sure that we are, as I mentioned before, we can have confidence in the assessment, but also the people involved in the interview squads have confidence in what they're asking, what they're going through is going to get us to that level. So some of the really important reasons are, like I've said, create that world-class hiring experience to attract and hire the best. That's what everyone wants to do, right? That's what we want to do. We want to be able to make data-led hiring decisions and be objective and informed. We also want to be able to assess against competencies that we have internally. we don't want to be making up kind of wishy-washy wants and desires. I'm sure we've all seen those job specs, right, that have requirements and stuff that you may, yeah, exactly. And I think you kind of look at that sometimes, and I can see why you have that on adverts and job specs, and we may have had that as well. I think though, when you're actually interviewing someone, going back to that specific part, it needs to be like, what challenges are a team facing right now? Like, how can someone make a difference right now, and what do we see coming that we can plan against? So, assessing against those, and the people team have done an amazing job last year in implementing a 10x leveling framework internally and progression paths. So, I mean, they did a lot of the hard work for us, to be fair, in some of those competency parts, so we could link it directly to that. But someone then has a journey, right? They are interviewed against those competencies, but then when they join 10x, that's what comes up in their performance reviews. That's what they're looking at in their progression apps. So there's a consistency, not just through interview, but then also when they're here. So there's plenty of reasons why we do it, and I'm really excited to see how it comes out.
Just in terms of advice, I'm people manager listening, talent acquisition manager, anybody in leadership leads people, where do you start with something like this? Because, it can sound or look a little bit scary, yeah.
No, 100%. And I've joked about this with my boss, and when he first said that that's what he wanted to do and what we should do, I couldn't really even visualize it, like what the end product was. And I think, he did a great job in working through that with all of us, but also I think it is, if you're used to working in a certain way and interviewing in a certain way, and things like speed, right? I think 10x are incredibly fast. It's one of our big competitive advantages in the interview process. We're very quick. We're able to make decisions. We're able to get people through a process. And so if you're used to that, you kind of think that anything new coming in is a bit scary, and especially if you can't, like I said, if you can't visualize what it looks like. The big thing around the objective assessment is we're not looking to reinvent the wheel. Like, we have people at 10x who are excellent interviewers. We have processes that, like you said, they've got us through a lot of growth, right? They've hired some great people. We're not looking to change. We're looking to flesh out areas. We're looking to bring some consistency to areas. So in terms of looking at it, I think it has to be linked to what's important to you. There are off-the-shelf ones. I'm sure they work well. But I think if you want to have something that is long-term, and that you can change yourself, as we know, things change, right? So if you can adapt it as you go as well, I think that's where you need to look at. You need to look at what's important, where do you want to get to, and how do you get there? You kind of start at the end of the process and work your way back, I think, is the way that we did it, definitely. But yeah, it was definitely a bit scary. I think if you ask some of the talent team when it was first kind of broached, it was hard to visualize how it was.
And what sort of results have you seen from making those changes and having that more objective hiring process? And what's been the difference in the business?
Yeah, so it's pretty fresh off the press, right? So we don't have huge amounts of data, and that's actually something that's going to be really exciting throughout this year is getting some more data on it. And something we need to do on the back of rolling it out is the journey's never ending, right? You then need to collate that. You need to then maybe go back and adapt things. So you have to have that flexibility and dynamism. But in terms of what we've seen from the rollout itself, we've had really positive feedback on some of the tools that we've implemented. So around like scorecards, and I talked about that moving away, like not wanting a robotic way of interviewing, right? And I think when someone thinks about a scorecard or mandatory questions, that's where we all leap to, is that kind of is someone who's going to be asking 5 questions back to back and not really engaging. But what I think they saw and what they really liked in the feedback is we have workshops, focus groups with each individual area. So like let's build a scorecard that works for you, not just because it works for somewhere else in the business. We're rolling it out everywhere. What works for you? So there's quite a lot of groundwork from our side, but I think actually it will set us up in really good stead. One, to get the buy-in internally, which I think we've had really well, but two, to make sure that, like I said, we're getting the best results. So it's going to be really interesting. I'm looking forward to personally putting things in place and metrics in place that we can start to for want of a better word, judge how well it's done. And it's new, right? There are going to be some things that we might need to dip back in and alter. But I think that's
it's exciting, though, isn't it? Taking something large like that and building it step by step and seeing it through from beginning to end. It's
yeah, and we have workshops. So when we roll this out, the process at the moment is we engage with the area. So like I said, we build those scorecards. We get the endorsement from hiring managers, senior stakeholders. We then have a workshop that we roll out. So it is interactive. We obviously are running through what the assessment framework is, but also we are providing them with tools, questioning techniques, all those kind of stuff. We've also built this learning module from scratch, which covers a lot of the stuff we do in the workshop, but it also has loads of tools and techniques in how to interview. And that's important, right? People learn in different ways. Some people might love a workshop, some people might absolutely hate jumping into a breakout room or doing it that way. So having the two mediums for people learning
and then so well. It's interesting you mention that, because there's obviously it's a business change, and there's the stakeholders, hiring managers and various other people. Was there an element of kind of educating the stakeholders involved as to why this change is happening and why it's positive, and how was that received?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it was. I think one thing we did was we included people from the start. So as I said, there were a lot of great people who have interviewed for a long time, way longer than me, right? Who have interviewed at 10X and are engineers themselves, perhaps, or whatever. So we needed to lean on that knowledge. So it wasn't a case of we kind of built something without speaking to people and then said, look, here's what we're doing. This is what we're going to do. So I think that's also part of it. And we talked about the partnership side right before, and everything links back to that. You have to partner up. You have to see what works. I might work with the engineering hiring managers on a daily basis, but I don't know fully what's going on in those teams, what's working exactly well. So you have to work with them. So I don't think we've had like any pushback, like perhaps some healthy pushback around some areas where we've then gone back and taken that on board. But I think, like I said, there's hopefully anyway, there's nothing that is a massive surprise to people. Like I said, we're not looking to reinvent the wheel. We're just looking to put a few things around it to make it more efficient.
And you touched upon in your processes, hiring processes, tweaking, improving around inclusion. How have you approached that in a culture where we're increasingly focusing on improving our inclusion?
Yeah, so I think if we look at the hiring process, obviously the objective assessment will be a big part of that. We want to, we're big fans of that diversity of thought. So looking at diverse groups, whether that be ethnic groups, minority groups, different experience from companies that people have worked in, right? Just if it's banking, whether it's tech, meditech, all that kind of stuff, having that diversity of thought, which objective assessment will be able to uncover and really help us find that next generation of 10X quality and skill. So that's a part of it around the hiring process. I think with inclusion, something I see at 10X, and ultimately it's the first time I've worked, as I said, I came from agency, right? So I'm fully aware of inclusion. Like you said, it's a big part of everything everyone's doing. But seeing it in practice within a company that has grown, that has made that shift from startup to scale up, like I've said, it's an interesting way of an interesting thing to try and find what it means. And I think that you have to still have a focus on quality and the bar that you need internally, because that has that knock-on effect on how we are delivering to clients, how we are progressing as a company. But what you need, I think, is inclusion needs to filter through everything you do as a company. It can't be a bolt-on or something you do for show. It has to be approached with enthusiasm and passion. And so the talent team, as an example, could have all the best intentions in the world with being inclusive and having an inclusive hiring process. If you don't have that filtered across all the hiring managers, all the interview squads, and the decision makers, you're still hitting a brick wall, right? So it has to be across. And I think something 10x have really well is it is talked about a lot. It is transparent, and the hiring managers that are bought in. You know, one of my favourite things, I'm sure the rest of the talent team will say this as well, is when you get a new role in a certain team and the hiring manager is already on you around inclusion, right? They're already,
wow,
we need a big focus
brilliant.
on this. We need that's music to our ears. So that gives you something to work with, and you can again partner with them on trying to do that. But it's tough, right? We work in tech. There's no getting away from that. We, as a company, 80% of our workforce are products and engineering. We all know that's a particularly tough area to if we look at gender, for example. Absolutely. That's a particularly tough area to hire in and keep that diverse population within your workforce. But I mentioned evolving earlier. You have to be able to evolve with it. You have to keep on learning and being honest with yourself around you can always be better. So we had a great 2022, for example, around the percentage of new joiners or hires from a female point of view. But that's not it. It's not over, right? It then has to be better this year, and obviously those numbers will have a positive impact on our overall organisation numbers. But what I think is really good about 10x, and whether it's me, my boss, the chief people officer, Anthony, the owner, it doesn't stop, right? It's maybe a pat on the back. We're going in the right direction, but now we need to capitalise on that. We need to use it as a launch pad to continue to do well. And what can we do to kind of carry on being the best or striving to get there? So it never stops. That's for sure.
Absolutely. I probably want to segue a little bit into something we spoke around, which was the acknowledgement of achievement, employees' achievement. I'd be interested to find out what your views on that and kind of what you're doing and 10x are doing around that achievement acknowledgement in the business.
Yeah, there are many ways to do it, right? And I think, being totally honest, there are plenty of people in my team who are experts in that field and are way more qualified to talk about it. So what I'll do is probably just do my best to piggyback off some of their achievements and success.
Acknowledge their achievements.
No. Yeah, no, exactly. I think it's quite easy to forget sometimes at 10x. So we're 7 years old in the summer, in June. I think sometimes for what we have achieved in around this employee experience and acknowledging employees, we've done so much, and I think we have quite a sophisticated model now for our age. There are obvious things that we can look at, right? Bonuses, share schemes, salary, and making sure that's fair and in line with what it should be. Clear progression paths and promotions are super important. I think one thing we have to look at is how, when someone joins, they've learned about us through the process. They then joined. How are we supporting that person from day one? So their career progression, everyone's is different, right? It's a very personal thing. It also changes. You might have an idea of what you want to do. It might be people management, for example, now, but you go into a new environment, something else piques your interest, and actually you want to be a principal engineer, like you want to be a technical leader rather than a people leader. So we have to have those ways of acknowledging people and ways of giving them the avenues to do that. I think there are some other things off the top of my head, like recognition shout outs. So we have tools that we use internally that allow people to give recognition, whether it be within their team, their peers, other teams that are having a positive impact on perhaps what they're working on. And in our P&E All Hands, for example, every week we have a running section that runs through those recognition shout outs. So I think that's really important for the people who are working really hard, and it's really good on the individual level. But actually, it's really important as well for awareness and visibility on what people are doing. There are plenty, you know what it's like, right? In a company, the people are working really hard, and you may not have or be able to see a tangible benefit. You know, it might not be that it's the headline every time, but you can't function as a company without that going on. So having that awareness, and you know, I've definitely had it multiple times, right, where you hear about something a team is doing or an individual is doing, and you might have seen the benefits, but you have no idea all the work that's gone into it. So I think that sort of stuff is really important. Learning development as well, I think, with recognition and acknowledging that is our learning development has changed dramatically over the last 12 to 18 months, and the way in which we do it, and it's been a real positive shift. And the acknowledgement could be around, you know, obvious things around getting people on the right courses, helping them, supporting their L&D, but even drilling down on that, we've recently had L&D awards, for example. So that's great. Again, if we look on the individual side of things, it's, you know, awards for standout people who are taking ownership of their learning development and really driving it forward. Anthony, our owner, was actually talking yesterday at one of the workshops we were on, and you know, he said about how the person with the most to do with their own learning development is themselves. We can support, and it's our job to support people, but ultimately you have to take it on. You have to be able to push yourself. And we also have awards in that same thing. We had awards for contributors as well. So people at 10X who are creating learning modules, learning pathways to constantly help us get it better, and to support their peers, get them up to speed on certain things. So we have people who are contributing all the time to the learning development as well. So yeah, those are some that spring to mind. Like I said, there's a lot you can do, and people are very different. I think as a company and as a people team, you need to constantly try to tap into those intrinsic motivators, because everyone's different. And as an organisation, like I said, we have to tap into those on an individual level as much as possible. And I think we do that really well.
And then finally, just last question from me on this jacket, and I think it's a really important one. Given your experience, you've got experience agency side and internally, tons of experience in and around talent. And I know there's no silver bullet to this question, but I definitely think you've got some insight you could share around retaining talent, and especially in the market that we're in. You know, everybody's, you know, really pushing to get the best talent out there, and keeping it is, you know, just as important. So what's your thoughts around retaining people?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, you're right, there's no silver bullet. It'd be great if there was, but I think you can bring it back to some definitions, perhaps. You know, in terms of like a competitive market, we all know we're in a competitive market. That never changes. But what is it about the market right now, like in that moment in time, that is particularly competitive? So there are some factors that will always be there, but I think if we look at the last 3 years, there have been external factors that make it competitive. So by drilling down into those, you can then start to work out how can we, and that's in hiring and retention, right? That's how do we attract the talent, but then also how are we keeping it? So if we look at COVID as an obvious one, right, that had a knock-on effect in loads of ways as to how companies, you know, had to become competitive or change or think on their feet around how they were. That might be ways of working from home, and you know, ultimately we found through furloughing, right, and redundancies, a lot of great talent on the market through no fault of their own, and they may not have even wanted to come on the market, right, but found themselves there. So that competitiveness was having, you know, a lot of great people looking for roles, actively or passively, and how do you go and find the best quality for you through that number, but also how do you compare against your counterparts? And that, as I said, is very similar across hiring and retaining. I think then if you shift forwards, you then had suddenly everyone was hiring again. So then you've got big tech, you've got everyone coming in, and we saw what happened with things like salaries, and so that then had a competitive edge. In terms of retaining your staff, you had to be on top of what people's packages were. Are they being paid fairly? What's our benefits package like? Is it comparable? So again, that had a knock-on effect as to how to be competitive. And then coming into the last 12 months, a bit longer than 12 months, the external fact, cost of living, all those kind of stuff, basically finding out what it is about your market at that point that is competitive and trying to tackle that head on as best as you can, right? You have things in place where you may not be able, I'm sure everyone would love to just start offering whatever salary they wanted, but that's not the way the world works, unfortunately. But I think that's one way you can look at it, right? You can drill down into that. I think what we then need to be able to do is talk about the culture. So delivering on promises, delivering on stuff that is important to your workforce. Again, being specific. People always talk about it, right? It's like, fruit and fruit bowls and all this kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure that's lovely. It's great to be able to grab an apple with your morning coffee, but that's not what's keeping you in a company, right? So what can you put in place that is tangible, that is transparent, that makes a real difference to people's, in those intrinsic motivators that we talked about. So it has to be based around fair remuneration, like I've said a couple of times. Ultimately, I think there are many things that are important. If we look at it like pillars, remuneration is always going to be one of them. That ability to grow, both from a maybe job title point of view and monetary, but actually on a personal and professional level. Are you learning? Are you progressing? Because it's not always about promotions, right? It's around, are you learning a craft? Are you constantly getting better at what you do? So that's a big point. And yeah, I think you're always in the market we're in. I've talked about it already in terms of tech. The time in which people stay in roles is shorter than others, right? So you probably need to be a bit realistic around retention, and plan that unfortunately you will lose good people, which is where hiring strategies come into place as well. But I think there is plenty that you can do to get ahead. And even looking back at what I said about the competitive markets, right? And you'll know this from working in recruitment as well. It's cyclical, so you can start to also get ahead and be strategic about things. We're ultimately in a phase at the moment where you're seeing layoffs, you're seeing hiring freezes, you're still seeing plenty of companies hire, but it's a time where people are a bit twitchy. From what we've seen before, we kind of know what comes next, right? So like we can start to plan ahead around what might be coming from the market, what might be coming up. So how are we going to be competitive at that next stage? But yeah, you're right. There's no silver bullet. There are plenty of people, I think, at 10x who have seen enough change to be able to put us in the best position possible to deal with it. But yeah, unfortunately, no silver bullet as of yet.
Yeah, cheers, Jack. Do you know, I think I just want to say thank you for coming on the pod. I think you brought some real clarity and insight, in terms of everything you've described today. So thank you for that. There's a load in there that I think could add some real value to our community. Look, I just want to say, if for those listening, feel free to drop connect with Jack on LinkedIn. As usually mentioned, if you have any questions or follow up, please email me, jermaine.benjamin@transition-partners.co.uk. Jack, you've been fantastic. Thank you for jumping on. Some real insight there, and I appreciate you joining us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's
Cheers,
great
thanks.
to have a chat.
Thank you for listening to the Beyond Limits podcast. If you have any questions that we can answer at all on the podcast going forward, or if you would be interested in being a guest on the podcast, please email me directly at jermaine.benjamin@transition-partners.co.uk. Thanks again.